Private David Brown's life changes forever when he inherits two alien slave girls as part of a galactic will. The human soldier, serving in the Intergalactic Alliance forces, receives an unexpected summons to the bustling spaceport on Nexus Prime. His heart races as he's escorted through winding corridors to a dimly lit conference room. A holographic projection flickers to life, revealing the image of the recently deceased Galactic Emperor, Zorn the Benevolent. David stands at attention, unsure of what to expect. The Emperor's AI-powered will executor speaks, its metallic voice echoing in the room. Private David Brown, you have been chosen as one of the heirs to Emperor Zorn's vast estate, the AI announces. David's eyes widen in disbelief. Me? But why? The executor explains that Emperor Zorn, known for his eccentric decisions, randomly selected David from a list of decorated human soldiers. David's inheritance, two Elysian slave girls named Dana and Lyra. Conflict surges within David. The thought of owning sentient beings goes against everything he believes in. He opens his mouth to refuse, but the executor cuts him off. Be warned, Private Brown. Refusing the inheritance will result in the Elysians being sent to a harsh labor camp. David's jaw clenches. He looks at Dana and Lyra, their eyes filled with fear and hope. With a heavy sigh, he nods. I accept the responsibility. As David prepares to leave with the Elysians, alarms blare throughout the spaceport. The room's doors slam shut, locking them inside. What's happening? David demands. The executor's hologram flickers. Cronin mercenaries have breached the facility. They're after the inheritance. David's military training kicks in. He assesses the room, looking for escape routes. Is there another way out of here? The AI reveals a hidden panel leading to maintenance tunnels. David ushers Dana and Lyra towards the opening. As they crawl through the narrow passage, Dana whispers, "There's more to this inheritance than you know." David pauses, turning to face her. What do you mean? Dana's voice trembles. I possess vital information about a secret Elysian technology. It's hidden within my genetic code. This information could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. Realization dawns on David. That's the real reason behind this inheritance and the Cronin attack. They emerge from the tunnels near the docking bay. David spots his small personal spacecraft. There's our ticket out of here. As they make a dash for the ship, a group of Cronin mercenaries rounds the corner. Plasma bolts sizzle past David's ear. He pushes Dana and Lyra behind a stack of cargo containers. Stay down, David orders, drawing his sidearm. The firefight is intense. David's combat skills prove superior as he takes down Cronin after Cronin. When there's a lull in the shooting, he signals to Dana and Lyra. Run for the ship, now! They sprint across the hangar bay, plasma bolts raining around them. David provides covering fire, allowing the Elysians to board safely. He backs up the ramp, still firing, and slams the hatch control. The ship's engines roar to life. David slides into the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls. The spacecraft lifts off, blasting out of the hangar and into the star-filled expanse of space. David allows himself a moment of relief, but it's short-lived. Warning lights flash across the control panel. The ship shudders violently. What now? Lyra asks, fear evident in her voice. David's face pales as he reads the diagnostics. The engines have been sabotaged. We're adrift. A massive shadow looms over them. David looks up through this view screen to see a Cronin warship bearing down on their position. With limited life support, a damaged ship, and a powerful enemy in pursuit, David realizes their escape is far from over. He turns to Dana and Lyra, determination etched on his face. I don't know how, but I'm going to get us out of this, I promise. As the Cronin warship closes in, David Brown, the reluctant inheritor of two alien slave girls, prepares for the fight of his life. The fate of Dana's secret knowledge, and possibly the entire galaxy, now rests in his hands. The Cronin warship loomed ever closer, its imposing silhouette blotting out the stars. David's hands flew over the controls, desperately trying to coax more power from the failing engines. Sweat beaded on his forehead as warning lights flashed across the console. We're losing life support, he announced, his voice tight with tension. Oxygen levels are dropping. Dana stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with purpose. I can help, she said, placing her hand on the ship's computer interface. There's something you need to know about us Elysians. David watched in amazement as Dana's fingers seemed to meld with the control panel. Lines of code scrolled rapidly across the screen, and suddenly the ship's systems began to stabilize. How did you do that? David asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. Dana's voice was strained as she concentrated. It's part of our genetic encoding, our technology, our knowledge. It's all stored within our DNA. That's why we were enslaved. That's the real inheritance you've been given. As Dana worked to reroute power and initiate emergency repairs, David noticed Lyra huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. He moved to her side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Hey, it's going to be okay, he said softly. We're going to get through this. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm not as brave as Dana. David shook his head. Bravery isn't about not being afraid. It's about facing your fears. Their moment was interrupted by a violent shudder that rocked the ship. The Cronin warship had opened fire, its ion cannon lighting up the void of space. Evasive maneuvers, David shouted, leaping back to the pilot's seat. His hands danced across the controls, guiding their small craft in a series of wild spins and dives. Most of the ion blasts missed, but one clipped their wing, sending them into a tailspin. As David fought to regain control, he spotted a dense asteroid field ahead. Hold on tight, he warned. This is going to get rough. He plunged the ship into the field, weaving between massive chunks of space rock. The Cronin warship, too large to follow, was forced to circle the perimeter, firing blindly into the asteroids. As they navigated the treacherous field, Lyra's eyes suddenly went wide. Left, she cried out. Bank left now. David reacted instinctively, veering sharply to the left. A massive asteroid hurtled past, missing them by inches. How did you know? David asked, glancing at Lyra in awe. I'm not sure, Lyra admitted. I can just see the patterns, the trajectories. With Lyra's guidance, they were able to navigate deeper into the asteroid field, temporarily evading the Cronin threat. But their reprieve was short-lived. The ship's engines, already strained from the damage and David's evasive maneuvers, began to fail. We can't keep this up, Dana said, her face pale with exhaustion from interfacing with the ship's systems. We need a new plan. As if in response to her words, a priority transmission crackled through their comm system. A familiar voice filled the cockpit. Private Brown, this is Commander Sarah Chen. Do you copy? Commander, David exclaimed. We copy. We're under attack by a Cronin warship. Our ship is damaged, and we have 2 civilian passengers. Understood, Private. We've detected your distress signal and have dispatched a patrol, but our ETA is still several hours out. Can you hold out until then? David exchanged glances with Dana and Lyra. Several hours might as well be an eternity in their current situation. We'll do our best, Commander, David replied, trying to keep the doubt out of his voice. As the transmission ended, Dana spoke up. I have an idea, she said, but it's risky. We could use my genetic knowledge to overload the ship's power core. The energy surge could propel us to safety and disrupt the Cronin sensors. But, David prompted, sensing there was more. But it could also fry our systems completely, and the radiation exposure would be significant. David weighed their options. Stay in the asteroid field and hope their failing systems lasted until help arrived, or take a desperate gamble for freedom. I'll do it, he decided. I'll initiate the surge manually from the engine room. You two stay here where it's safer. As David stood to leave, Lyra suddenly grabbed his arm. Before he could react, she pulled him close and pressed her lips against his. The kiss was brief but intense, leaving David momentarily stunned. For luck, Lyra whispered, her cheeks flushing. David nodded, still processing what had just happened. He glanced at Dana, whose expression was unreadable, before heading to the engine room. Following Dana's instructions relayed through the ship's comm, David began reconfiguring the power core. The engine room hummed with unstable energy, the air thick with the scent of ozone. Ready when you are, David called out. The Cronin ship is closing in, Dana reported. It's now or never. David took a deep breath and initiated the surge. A blinding flash of energy erupted from the core, engulfing the ship. David felt a searing pain course through his body as the radiation washed over him. Then everything went dark. When David regained consciousness, he found himself back in the cockpit, with Lyra tending to his injuries. His body ached and his vision was blurry, but he was alive. "Did it work?" he asked weakly. Dana nodded, relief evident in her voice. "We've jumped to a new location. The Cronin ship is gone." But their victory was bittersweet. A quick systems check revealed they were operating on minimal power, lost in an unknown sector of space. "I'm picking up readings of a nearby planet," Dana reported. "It could be our best chance for sanctuary." As Lyra continued to treat David's radiation exposure with Elysian healing techniques, he considered their options: land on an unknown world or drift in space, hoping Alliance help would find them before their systems failed completely. David looked at the two Elysian women, feeling a surge of protectiveness. Whatever they decided, he knew their fates were now intertwined. As they approached the mysterious planet, David realized that their adventure, and the complications it brought, was not nearly finished. Over. As the mysterious planet loomed larger in their view screen, David made his decision. "We're going to attempt a landing," he announced, his voice hoarse from radiation exposure. "It's our best chance for survival." Dana nodded, her fingers still intertwined with the ship's controls. "I've analyzed the atmosphere. It's breathable, but the composition is unlike anything I've encountered before." Lyra placed a reassuring hand on David's shoulder. "I'll help guide us in. I can sense the safest path through the turbulence." David gave her a grateful nod, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through him at her touch. He focused on the task at hand, his hands gripping the controls tightly as they began their descent. The ship shuddered violently as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Warning lights flashed across the console, and alarms blared throughout the cockpit. David gritted his teeth, fighting to keep the craft stable. "Bank left," Lyra called out. "There's a wind shear coming." David complied, trusting her instincts. The ship lurched, narrowly avoiding a potentially catastrophic gust. They broke through the cloud cover, revealing a landscape that took their breath away. A dense forest stretched out beneath them, its foliage an otherworldly shade of purple. Bioluminescent plants pulsed with an eerie glow, creating patterns of light that danced across the canopy. "There," Dana pointed to a small clearing. "It's our best shot for a landing zone." David aimed for the spot, the ship's failing engines protesting as he pushed them to their limits. They hit the ground hard, skidding across the alien soil before coming to a stop at the edge of the forest. For a moment they sat in stunned silence, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were alive but stranded on an unknown world, with a damaged ship and a Cronin warship potentially in pursuit. "We made it," Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. David unbuckled his harness, wincing at the pain that shot through his radiation-weakened body. "Let's assess our situation. Dana, can you get any systems back online?" Dana nodded, her expression determined. "I'll see what I can salvage. Our priority should be communication and life support." "Good. Lyra and I will scout the immediate area. Look for any resources we can use." David turned to Lyra. "Stay close. We don't know what kind of dangers this place might hold." As they exited the ship, the alien world assaulted their senses. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents, sweet and pungent. Strange, chittering sounds echoed from the forest, punctuated by the occasional screech of an unseen creature. David and Lyra moved cautiously, their eyes darting from one alien plant to another. Mushroom-like growths pulsed with an inner light, while vines snaked across the ground, their tendrils seeming to reach for the newcomer's feet. "It's beautiful," Lyra murmured, reaching out to touch a delicate, glowing flower. As her fingers brushed its petals, it retracted, curling in on itself. David watched her, struck by the way the bioluminescent light played across her features. He pushed the thought aside, reminding himself of their precarious situation. "Let's keep moving. We need to find water and anything that might help us repair the ship." They pressed deeper into the forest, the dense canopy above casting everything in a soft purple twilight. As they walked, David noticed Lyra becoming more confident, her steps sure as she navigated the alien terrain. "You seem to be adapting quickly," he observed. Lyra smiled, a hint of pride in her voice. "It's like I can feel the rhythms of this place, the way energy flows through the plants, the animals. It's comforting, in a way." Their conversation was cut short as they emerged into a small clearing. Before them stood the crumbling remains of what could only be described as a temple. Ancient stone columns, wrapped in glowing vines, framed an entrance that led into darkness. "What is this place?" David breathed, taking in the sight of the alien ruins. Lyra stepped forward, her hand outstretched towards the structure. "It's old, very old, but there's something familiar about it." As they stood there, the air seemed to thicken with tension. David found himself acutely aware of Lyra's presence beside him, the gentle sound of her breathing, the faint scent of her skin beneath the alien aromas of the forest. Lyra turned to him, her eyes shimmering in the bioluminescent light. "David, Before she could finish, a piercing alarm cut through the air. Their communicators crackled to life. Dana's voice filled with urgency. "David! Lyra, get back here now! We've got company!" They sprinted back through the forest, David's heart pounding with exertion and fear. As they burst into the clearing where their ship lay, they skidded to a halt, faced with an unbelievable sight. Surrounding their craft was a group of creatures unlike anything David had ever seen. They stood on 2 legs but had 4 arms, their bodies covered in short, iridescent fur. Their faces were a bizarre blend of lemur-like features and tentacles that writhed gently around their mouths. Dana stood at the ship's entrance, her hands raised in a gesture of peace, her eyes locked with David's, silently pleading for help. David stepped forward, his mind racing. These creatures, these octomures, as he found himself dubbing them, could be their salvation or their doom. As he opened his mouth to speak, he realized that the fate of not just their small group, but potentially 2 civilizations, hung in the balance of this moment. The octomures chittered amongst themselves, their tentacles waving in complex patterns. David took a deep breath, preparing to make first contact with an unknown alien species. Whatever happened next would shape the course of their survival on this mysterious world. David's heart raced as he faced the alien creatures, their tentacles swaying in an almost hypnotic pattern. He took a cautious step forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We mean you no harm," he said, hoping his tone conveyed friendliness despite the language barrier. To his surprise, one of the octomures stepped forward and responded in a series of clicks and whistles that seemed to form coherent words. "Strangers, why here?" the creature asked, its voice a bizarre blend of organic and mechanical sounds. David exchanged glances with Lyra and Dana, stunned by this unexpected development. Lyra stepped forward, her empathetic nature taking the lead. "We're refugees," she explained, her voice soft and soothing. "Our ship was damaged, and we needed a place to land. We didn't know this planet was inhabited." The lead octomure's tentacles rippled, seeming to consider her words. "Show technology," it requested, gesturing towards their ship. Dana nodded, moving slowly to retrieve a small device from the craft. She held it out, activating a holographic display of Elysian star charts. The octomures chittered excitedly among themselves, their iridescent fur shimmering in the planet's eerie light. The lead creature reached out with one of its 4 arms, its fingers hovering just above the hologram. "Elysian," it said, the word filled with a mix of awe and wariness. David's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You know of the Elysians?" The octomure's tentacles twisted in what might have been a nod. "Ancient protectors, long gone." As the conversation progressed, David felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He stumbled, catching himself against the ship's hull. Lyra was at his side in an instant, her cool hand on his forehead. "The radiation exposure," she murmured, worry evident in her voice. "It's getting worse." The lead octomure observed this exchange with apparent interest. "Sick one?" it inquired. Lyra nodded. "Yes, he needs medical attention. Do you have healers among your people?" The creature's tentacles writhed in a complex pattern. Healers? Yes, but not for your kind. It paused, seeming to consider something. We have mineral, cures many ills. David's eyes widened at this news. He pushed himself upright, fighting against the weakness in his limbs. This mineral, can we trade for it? The Octomor's eyes, multifaceted and gleaming, fixed on David. Trade? Yes, but what? Offer? Dana stepped forward, her expression determined. We can offer Elysian technology, knowledge to help protect your world. This statement caused a ripple of excitement among the gathered Octomors. They conferred among themselves in rapid clicks and whistles. Finally, the leader turned back to the group. Show defenses, then decide. As they prepared to follow the Octomors to the ancient ruins, a commotion from the ship caught their attention. The communication system crackled to life, a garbled message breaking through. Cronin forces, systematic search, planet-wide. David's face paled. They're here. We need to move quickly. The Octomors, sensing the urgency, led them swiftly through the bioluminescent forest. As they traveled, David felt his strength ebbing. Each step became a monumental effort, his vision blurring at the edges. They reached the crumbling temple they had discovered earlier. The Octomors ushered them inside, revealing a vast chamber filled with dormant Elysian technology. Dana approached a central console, her fingers hovering over the alien controls. I think I can activate the defense systems, but it will take time. As Dana worked, an elder Octomor named Zix approached, its tentacles twitching with agitation. Dangerous. Awaken old magic, it warned. Lyra, supporting a weakening David, turned to Zix. We understand your concerns, but this technology could protect your world from the Cronin threat. Zix's multifaceted eyes narrowed. Protect or destroy? Off-world technology corrupts. The chamber erupted into debate, with Octomors taking sides. Some supported activating the defenses, while others, led by Zix, vehemently opposed it. As the argument intensified, David felt his legs give way. He collapsed to the ground, his body racked with tremors. Lyra knelt beside him, her hands glowing with Elysian healing energy. Hold on, David, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We'll find a way to help you. The sight of David's deteriorating condition seemed to silence the debate. Zix approached, its tentacles moving in a soothing pattern. The mineral might help, it conceded, but activation, risky. Donna looked up from the console, her eyes wide with a newfound understanding. I think I've found a way to power the defenses without compromising your way of life, she announced, but we'll need to work together. As Dana explained her plan, David drifted in and out of consciousness. He was vaguely aware of Lyra's comforting presence, of the Octomor's chittering discussions, and of a growing sense of urgency. In his fevered state, David saw flashes of strange visions. A hidden moonbase, a familiar face twisted with madness, and a looming threat that dwarfed even the Cronin warships. When he next opened his eyes, the chamber was a flurry of activity. Octomors and humans worked side by side, preparing for the activation of the ancient defenses. Lyra sat beside him, her hand entwined with his. What's happening? David asked, his voice weak. Lyra smiled, relief evident in her eyes. We're about to activate the defenses. The Octomors agreed to help, but we had to make some compromises. Before David could inquire further, a low hum filled the air. The dormant Elysian technology began to pulse with life, bathing the chamber in an otherworldly glow. Dana stood at the central console, her body rigid with concentration. As she interfaced with the ancient systems, her eyes widened in shock. There's so much here, she gasped. So much knowledge. So much power. As the defenses powered up, the very air seemed to crackle with energy. Outside, they could hear the distant sound of Cronin ships losing power, their engines sputtering and dying. David struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Lyra. We need to act now, while they're vulnerable, he said, his military training kicking in despite his weakened state. Zix approached, holding out a small, glowing crystal. The mineral, it explained. Use wisely. As Lyra began to administer the mineral's healing properties to David, the group faced a crucial decision. With the Cronin threat neutralized for now and new discoveries waiting to be explored, they stood at a crossroads that would shape not only their fate, but potentially that of two civilizations. The ancient chamber hummed with potential, its secrets only beginning to unfold. And somewhere in the vastness of space, a message from Commander Chen hinted at greater challenges to come. Come. The ancient chamber fell silent as the group absorbed the gravity of Chen's message. David pushed himself up, his strength returning thanks to the mineral's effects. We need to move quickly, he said, his voice hoarse but determined. Dana, how soon can we get the ship operational? Dana's fingers flew over her data pad. With the mineral and some salvaged Cronin parts, we could be airborne in a few hours. Lyra's brow furrowed. What about the Octomers? We can't just leave them defenseless. David placed a hand on her shoulder. You're right. We'll need to prepare them as best we can. As Dana and David set to work on the ship, Lyra took charge of training the Octomers. She led a group of volunteers to the ancient defense systems, teaching them the basics of operation and maintenance. Remember, she said, demonstrating a sequence on the console. This pattern activates the shield. This one powers up the energy cannons. Zix, watching closely, mimicked her movements. Protect. Home. It chittered, its tentacles swaying with dedication. As the hours passed, David's strength continued to improve. He worked alongside Dana, marveling at how quickly she interfaced with the Elysian and Cronin tech. I've never seen anything like this, Dana muttered, her eyes glazed over as she processed information at an inhuman speed. The Elysian data core. It's incredible. Suddenly she gasped, her eyes widening. David, you need to see this. David hurried over, wiping grease from his hands. What is it? Dana's voice trembled with excitement. The moon base, it's not just a repository, it's a beacon. It can call Elysian ships from across the galaxy. The implications hit David like a thunderbolt. That could change everything. As they finished the repairs, a distant explosion rocked the ground. David rushed outside to see smoke rising from the Octomur settlement. Cronin stragglers, he growled, grabbing a nearby energy rifle. Lyra, Dana, with me! They raced towards the settlement, joining the Octomurs in repelling the Cronin attack. David's military training kicked in as he coordinated their defense, shouting orders over the chaos of battle. Amidst the firefight, David spotted Zix, cornered by a Cronin soldier. Without hesitation, he threw himself in front of the Octomur, taking a glancing hit from an energy weapon. As the last Cronin fell, silence descended on the battlefield. Lyra rushed to David's side, her hands glowing with healing energy. I'm fine, David grunted, though he leaned into her touch. Their eyes met, a moment of unspoken emotion passing between them. The moment was shattered by Dana's urgent voice. We've got incoming! The Cronin fleets entered the system. David struggled to his feet. We need to leave. Now. As they hurried back to the ship, Lyra's steps faltered. David, we can't abandon them. They're not ready. David's teeth clenched. I know, but we don't have a choice. If we don't reach that moon base, none of us stand a chance. They boarded the ship, the engines humming to life. Through the view screen, they watched as the Elysian defenses activated, enveloping Lumina in a shimmering shield. As they broke its atmosphere, the enormity of the Cronin fleet came into view. Hundreds of warships filled the sky, their weapons primed. Setting course for the moon, Dana announced, her voice tight. David settled into the co-pilot's seat, keenly aware of Lyra's conflicted presence behind him. The ship accelerated, leaving Lumina and its newly allied inhabitants behind. As they approached the moon, proximity alarms blared. Dana's fingers flew over the controls. Multiple ships incoming! It's a Cronin strike team! David's hands tightened on the controls. Can we outrun them? Dana shook her head. Negative. They're gaining fast. Through the comms, a gravelly voice crackled to life. Attention, human vessel. This is Warlord Grok of the Cronin Empire. Surrender the Elysian technology or be destroyed. David exchanged glances with Lyra and Dana. The hidden Elysian outpost lay just ahead, holding the key to their survival and possibly the fate of the entire sector. But with Grok's forces closing in and Lumina's defenses faltering behind them, their options were rapidly dwindling. David took a deep breath, his mind racing through possible strategies. Whatever he decided next would shape not only their fate, but potentially that of two civilizations. The only certainty was that the real battle was just beginning. David's mind raced, weighing their limited options. He glanced at Lyra and Dana, their faces etched with tension. With a deep breath, he made his decision. "Warlord Grok," he replied, his voice steady, "we will not surrender, but we propose a different solution." Static crackled over the comm before Grok's gruff voice returned. "Speak quickly, human. My patience wears thin." "We have information about an Elysian outpost on this moon," David said, ignoring Lyra's sharp intake of breath. "We'll share its location if you grant us safe passage." A tense silence followed. Finally, Grok spoke. "Agreed. Transmit the coordinates." Dana's fingers flew over the console, sending a carefully altered set of coordinates. As soon as the transmission completed, David pushed the ship's engines to their limit, rocketing toward the moon's surface. "That should buy us some time," he muttered, scanning the barren landscape below. They touched down near a cluster of towering rock formations. As they disembarked, Lyra pointed to a barely visible seam in the rocky face. "There, the entrance." They approached cautiously, alert for any signs of Cronin pursuit. Dana stepped forward, her eyes glazing over as she interfaced with the hidden security systems. The rock face shimmered and parted, revealing a dark passage. "Impressive," David whispered, leading the way inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the entrance sealed behind them. Soft blue lights flickered to life, illuminating a vast underground complex filled with sleek, unfamiliar technology. "This is incredible," Dana breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the Elysian marvel. A holographic interface sprang to life before them, projecting the image of a regal Elysian figure. The being's eyes seemed to look directly at David as it spoke. "Greetings, heir of Zorn. If you are viewing this message, our people face great peril. This outpost was created as a fail-safe, a beacon to reunite and protect the scattered Elysian people in their darkest hour." The hologram flickered, its gaze sweeping over the group. "The beacon can only be activated by a non-Elysian deemed worthy. This is why you were chosen, David Chen. You are the key to our salvation." As the message faded, Dana immediately set to work on the main console. "I'll try to activate the beacon," she said, her fingers dancing over the alien interface. David nodded, turning to Lyra. "We should check the outpost defenses. Grok won't be fooled for long." They moved swiftly through the complex, discovering caches of advanced Elysian weapons and defense systems. Many showed signs of age and disrepair, but David's military training allowed him to quickly assess their potential. "This could give us an edge," he said, hefting a sleek energy rifle. "But we'll need to work fast to get everything operational." A distant explosion rocked the outpost. Lyra's eyes unfocused briefly, her precognitive abilities kicking in. "Grok's forces have arrived. They're targeting the rock formations above us." David's lips pursed. "Time's up. Let's move." They raced back to the main chamber, where Dana was still working feverishly at the console. "I can't activate it," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "It needs some kind of genetic key." Another explosion shook the complex, closer this time. David could hear the sound of Cronin energy weapons impacting the moon's surface. "What kind of key?" he asked urgently. Dana's eyes widened in realization. "It needs a combination of Elysian and non-Elysian DNA. David, I need a sample of your DNA." Understanding dawned on him. Without hesitation, he pressed his palm against the console's biosensor. A brief sting and a drop of his blood merged with a glowing vial of Elysian genetic material. The outpost hummed to life, power surging through long-dormant systems. A brilliant beam of energy shot skyward, punching through the rock above and streaking into space. "The beacon is active," Dana announced, her voice filled with awe and relief. Their moment of triumph was short-lived. The outpost's power levels plummeted, leaving them in near darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows. "What happened?" Lyra asked, her voice tense. "The beacon drained our power reserves," Dana replied, her fingers flying over the dimmed console. "Defenses are offline." A thunderous crack echoed through the complex as part of the ceiling caved in. Through the newly formed opening, David could see Cronin dropships descending. "Defensive positions now," he shouted, raising his Elysian rifle. Cronin soldiers poured into the outpost, their heavy armor clanking against the ancient floor. At their head strode a massive figure, his armor adorned with trophies of conquest. "Warlord Grok, I presume," David said, his voice hard. Grok's eyes narrowed, focusing on the Elysian weapon in David's hands. "You've made a grave mistake, human. That technology belongs to the Cronin Empire now." David's finger tightened on the trigger. "I respectfully disagree." The chamber erupted into chaos as both sides opened fire. David ducked behind a console, laying down suppressing fire while Lyra used her abilities to anticipate and counter the Cronin's moves. Dana worked frantically to restore power to the outpost shields. Amidst the firefight, Grok charged toward David, his massive warhammer swinging in a deadly arc. David rolled aside, the hammer smashing into the floor where he had stood moments before. Using his smaller size and greater agility to his advantage, David darted in and out of Grok's reach, landing precise shots with his Elysian rifle. But Grok's armor absorbed much of the damage, and his relentless assault drove David back. A lucky blow sent David sprawling, his rifle skittering across the floor. Grok loomed over him, hammer raised for a killing stroke. "Any last words, human?" Before David could respond, a pulse of energy struck Grok, staggering him. Lyra stood nearby, her hands glowing with Elysian power. "Get away from him!" she snarled. David seized the moment, sweeping Grok's legs out from under him. The warlord crashed to the ground, his hammer flying from his grasp. David pounced, grappling with the much larger Cronin. It was a brutal, desperate struggle. David's combat training allowed him to hold his own, but Grok's superior strength was overwhelming. Slowly, inexorably, Grok pinned David to the ground, his armored hands closing around David's throat. "David!" Lyra cried out. She focused her abilities, projecting a wave of disorientation at Grok. The warlord's grip loosened for a crucial second. It was all David needed. He drove his knee into a weak point in Grok's armor, simultaneously twisting to break the Cronin's hold. In one fluid motion, he reversed their positions, pinning Grok beneath him. Before David could press his advantage, a blinding light filled the chamber. Everyone, human and Cronin alike, froze in amazement as sleek, otherworldly ships descended through the opening in the ceiling. "Elysian vessels," Lyra breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. The tide of battle shifted instantly. Cronin soldiers fell back in disarray as Elysian troops deployed, their advanced weaponry making short work of the invaders. David sagged in relief, the adrenaline drain leaving him lightheaded. He became acutely aware of the various injuries he'd sustained during the fight. Lyra was at his side in an instant, her cool hands assessing his wounds. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the chaos around them faded away. David reached up, gently cupping Lyra's cheek. No words were needed. The depth of their feelings for each other was clear in that silent exchange. Their moment was interrupted by Dana's urgent voice. "David, Lyra, we've got a problem." They turned to see Dana, her face illuminated by the glow of a holographic display. "The Elysian fleet is engaging the Cronin armada, but they're outnumbered, and I'm picking up transmissions. Cronin reinforcements are on the way." David struggled to his feet, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "We need to help them. What resources do we have?" As Dana began to list their options, David's thoughts turned to Lumina and the Octomores they'd left behind. He knew what he had to do next, but the path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty. The battle for the sector was nowhere near the end, and the next moves they made would be crucial. With Lyra at his side and new allies joining their cause, David prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a determined nod to Lyra and Dana, David activated the ship's comm system. "This is David Chen to all Elysian forces. We need to return to Lumina immediately. The planet is still under threat, and we have vital information that could turn the tide of this battle." An Elysian commander's face appeared on the display. Understood, David Chen. Will provide escort and clear a path through the Cronin fleet. As their ship launched from the moon's surface, David couldn't help but marvel at the sight before him. The vast expanse of space was alive with energy beams and explosions as Elysian and Cronin ships engaged in a fierce dogfight. Their enhanced vessel, now equipped with Elysian technology, darted between the battling ships. Cronin fighters attempted to intercept them, but the upgrades allowed Dana to execute maneuvers that would have been impossible before. "Hold on!" Dana called out as she barrel-rolled the ship to avoid a barrage of Cronin fire. David gripped his seat, his body protesting from the injuries sustained during his fight with Grok. Lyra placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We're almost there," she said, her eyes fixed on the blue-green orb of Lumina growing larger in the viewport. As they entered Lumina's atmosphere, the true extent of the planet's peril became clear. The Elysian shield that had once seemed impenetrable now flickered and wavered under the relentless assault of Cronin warships. "The shield won't hold much longer," Dana reported, her voice tense as she guided the ship towards the Octomore settlement. The scene that greeted them upon landing was one of chaos. Cronin ground forces had breached the defensive perimeter, and the air was filled with the sounds of energy weapons and the acrid smell of smoke. As they disembarked, Zix, the Octomore elder, rushed to meet them. His usually composed features were etched with worry. "David, Lyra, thank the stars you've returned. The Cronins have pushed us back to the ancient ruins. A group of our people are trapped inside, and the enemy is closing in." David's mind raced, assessing the situation. Despite the pain that racked his body, he knew there was no time to rest. "We need to mount a rescue operation immediately. Zix, gather your best fighters. We'll use the Elysian weapons we brought from the moon outpost." As Zix hurried to assemble a team, David turned to Lyra. "I need you with me. Your abilities could make the difference between success and failure." Lyra nodded, her eyes gleaming with persistence. "Always." Within minutes, a small but determined group of Octomore fighters had gathered, their tentacles deftly handling the unfamiliar Elysian weapons. David quickly briefed them on the plan, emphasizing the need for speed and stealth. As they moved out, David took point, his enhanced rifle at the ready. The sounds of battle grew louder as they approached the ruins, and soon they encountered the first wave of Cronin soldiers. "Take cover!" David shouted as energy bolts sizzled through the air. He rolled behind a fallen pillar, returning fire with precision. Lyra moved like a ghost, her precognitive abilities allowing her to anticipate the Cronin's moves and counter them effortlessly. The Octomores, inspired by their leader's bravery, fought with a ferocity that belied their usually peaceful nature. Their tentacles whipped and coiled, wielding the Elysian weapons with surprising effectiveness. As they pushed forward, a familiar voice called out from behind a nearby rock formation. "Hold your fire! I want to help!" David's eyes widened as he recognized the speaker. "Captain Vrock?" The Cronin officer emerged, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I've seen enough destruction. Grok's war is not one I wish to be part of any longer." David hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "We could use your knowledge of Cronin tactics, but make no mistake, one wrong move, and you'll regret it." With Vrock's assistance, they were able to outmaneuver the Cronin forces and reach the entrance to the ruins. As they fought their way inside, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His suspicions were confirmed when they reached the central chamber. The trapped Octomores huddled in a corner, but it was the sight at the far end of the room that made David's blood run cold. A team of Cronin technicians was working feverishly at what appeared to be an ancient Elysian control panel. "They're trying to disable the planet's shield," Lyra gasped, her eyes wide with realization. David turned to the group. "Vrock, lead the Octomores out. We'll hold off any Cronin reinforcements. Lyra, see if you can stop whatever they're doing." As Vrock and the Octomores began their retreat, David and Lyra advanced towards the Cronin technicians. The air crackled with energy as both sides opened fire. David dove behind a console, popping up to take precise shots that dropped 2 Cronins in quick succession. Beside him, Lyra's hands glowed with Elysian power as she interfaced with the ruined systems. "I'm locked out," she called out, frustration evident in her voice. They've already bypassed several security protocols. Keep trying, David shouted back, ducking as a Cronin energy bolt seared the air where his head had been moments before. We can't let them succeed. The battle raged on, with David and the remaining Octomore fighters holding off wave after wave of Cronin soldiers. Vrock proved his worth, using his intimate knowledge of Cronin tactics to anticipate and counter their moves. Just as it seemed they might be overwhelmed, Lyra let out a triumphant cry. I'm in! Initiating emergency protocols now! A surge of power coursed through the ruins, causing the Cronin equipment to spark and short out. The remaining enemy soldiers fell back in disarray, leaving David and his allies in control of the chamber. As the dust settled, David's comm unit crackled to life. Dana's voice came through, tense and urgent. David, we've got a new problem. A rogue faction of the Intergalactic Alliance has entered the system. They're after the Elysian technology, and they're engaging both Cronin and Elysian ships. David exchanged a worried glance with Lyra. The situation had just become far more complicated than they could have imagined. As they prepared to face this new threat, neither of them realized that the discoveries they were about to make would shake the very foundations of their understanding of the galaxy and their place in it. David's mind raced as he processed Dana's warning about the rogue Intergalactic Alliance faction. He turned to Lyra, tenacity etched on his face. We need to act fast. If we don't do something, Lumina and all its secrets will be lost. Lyra nodded, her eyes gleaming with commitment. I think I know what we need to do. The ancient Elysian defenses, if we can fully activate them, we might have a chance. As if on cue, the first rays of dawn began to filter through the ruins, casting long shadows across the chamber. David tapped his comm unit, connecting with Dana on the moon outpost. Dana, we're going to attempt to activate Lumina's planetary defenses. Can you coordinate with the Elysian fleet from your position? Affirmative, Dana's voice crackled through the speaker. I'll sync our efforts and keep you updated on the space battle. David turned to the assembled group, a mix of Octomers, Elysian warriors, and the newly allied Captain Vrock. All right, listen up. We're going to make our stand here. Lyra will lead a team to the heart of the ruins to interface with the core systems. The rest of us will defend this position with everything we've got. As Lyra gathered her team and prepared to delve deeper into the ruins, David organized the defenses. He positioned fighters at key choke points, utilizing the ancient architecture for cover. Captain Vrock proved invaluable, his knowledge of Cronin tactics allowing them to anticipate and counter potential assault routes. David's comm unit buzzed again. David, this is Commander Sarah Chen. We've entered the system with loyal Alliance forces. The situation up here is chaotic. Blackwood's ships are engaging both Cronin and Elysian vessels. What's your status? We're initiating a plan to activate Lumina's defenses, David replied, his voice steady despite the tension. If we succeed, it could turn the tide of the battle. Can you provide us any support? We'll do what we can to keep Blackwood's forces off your back, Sarah assured him. Good luck, David. Chen out. As if on cue, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. David steadied himself against a nearby pillar, watching in awe as massive structures began to rise from beneath Lumina's surface. The ancient Elysian defenses were awakening. In the heart of the ruins, Lyra worked feverishly to interface with the planet's core systems. Her hands danced over the control panels, her Elysian abilities allowing her to decipher and manipulate the complex technology. The Octomers assisting her watched in fascination as the ruins came to life around them. Back at the defensive position, David's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of approaching enemies. Here they come, he shouted, raising his rifle. Hold the line! The air filled with the sizzle of energy weapons as Cronin forces and Blackwood's commandos launched their assault. David moved from cover to cover, his shots finding their marks with deadly precision. The Octomers, emboldened by his leadership, fought with a ferocity that belied their usually peaceful nature. As the battle raged, the ground continued to shake. Outside, massive defense platforms emerged from hidden underground bays, their ancient weapon systems powering up for the first time in millennia. David's comm crackled to life once more. David, it's Dana. The Elysian fleet is moving into formation around the new defense platforms, but Blackwood's launching an all-out assault on Lumina. We need those defenses online now. Gritting his teeth, David fired off another burst from his rifle, dropping 2 advancing commandos. "Lyra, how much longer?" he called into his comm. "Almost there," Lyra's voice came back, strained with effort. "Just a few more minutes." Those minutes felt like an eternity as David and his allies fought to hold their position. The air grew thick with smoke and the acrid smell of weapons fire. David's muscles burned with exertion, but he pushed through the pain, knowing that everything hinged on their success. Suddenly, a brilliant surge of energy erupted from the heart of the ruins. It spread outward in a rapidly expanding sphere, enveloping Lumina and stretching far into space. As it passed over them, David felt a strange tingling sensation, as if every cell in his body was resonating with the ancient Elysian power. "Defenses are online," Lyra's triumphant voice rang out. "The planetary shield is active." David watched in awe as the energy field solidified into a shimmering barrier. Through his comm, he could hear the amazed voices of the space forces as Blackwood's ships were caught off guard, their weapons and drive systems disabled by the expanding shield. But there was no time to celebrate. Even as the tide turned in space, the ground battle continued to rage. David spotted a group of Blackwood's elite commandos pushing towards the entrance to the inner ruins, where Lyra was still working to stabilize the defense systems. "Not on my watch," David muttered, signaling to Vrock and a group of Octomorph fighters. Together, they launched a counteroffensive, catching the commandos in a brutal crossfire. As David fought his way forward, he caught glimpses of the larger battle through gaps in the ruins. Elysian ships, their hulls gleaming in the light of Lumina's sun, maneuvered in perfect formation with the planetary defense platforms. Some Cronin vessels, seeing the odds shift, moved to join them against Blackwood's forces. The fighting intensified as they pushed the enemy back. David's world narrowed to a series of swift, brutal encounters. A commando dealt with by a precisely aimed shot here, a Cronin soldier disarmed and subdued there. His body moved on instinct, years of training in the heat of battle honing his reactions to a razor's edge. As they neared the entrance to the inner sanctum, a familiar figure stepped out from behind a pillar. Admiral Blackwood himself, his Alliance uniform scorched and torn, but his eyes blazing with fury. "You!" he snarled, raising an advanced Alliance weapon. "You've ruined everything." David didn't waste breath on a reply. He dove for cover as Blackwood opened fire, the air sizzling with the intensity of the energy blasts. As he rolled to his feet, David caught Vrock's eye and nodded towards Lyra's position. The Cronin captain understood immediately, leading the rest of their forces to secure the perimeter, while David faced Blackwood alone. It was a dance of death between them, each man pushing his skills and technology to the limit. Blackwood's advanced weaponry gave him a deadly edge, but David's experience and his growing attunement to the Elysian tech around them kept him in the fight. They traded blows and shots, neither able to gain a decisive advantage. David could feel his strength waning, the toll of the long battle catching up with him. But he knew he couldn't falter, not with so much at stake. In a bold strategy, David feinted left, then threw himself right, colliding with Blackwood in a tackle that sent them both crashing to the ground. The Admiral's weapons skittered across the floor as they grappled, each fighting for supremacy. Despite Blackwood's cybernetic enhancements, David's natural strength and combat experience began to tell. Slowly, inexorably, he gained the upper hand, pinning Blackwood to the ground. "It's over, Admiral," David gasped, his muscles trembling with exertion. "Stand down." For a moment, Blackwood's eyes blazed with defiance. Then, as if all the fight had suddenly left him, he sagged in defeat. "You have no idea what you've done," he muttered. "The forces you've unleashed." Before David could question him further, a brilliant flash of light filled the chamber. He looked up to see Lyra standing in the doorway of the inner sanctum, her hands still glowing with Elysian energy. "It's done," she said, her voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. "The defenses are fully operational and stable." As if to confirm her words, David's comm unit erupted with a cacophony of voices. Commander Chen, Dana, and others all reporting the same thing. Blackwood's forces were in full retreat, the combined might of the Elysian defenses and the Allied fleet too much for them to overcome. David allowed himself a moment of relief. Though he knew the battle, and its consequences were nowhere near the end. He looked from the defeated Blackwood to Lyra, then out towards the horizon where the first of Lumina's defense platforms were now visible, rising majestically against the brightening sky. Whatever came next, he knew their actions here had changed the course of history, not just for Lumina, but for the entire sector. As he moved to secure Blackwood and check on his allies, David couldn't help but wonder what new challenges and revelations awaited them in the aftermath of this victory.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.